All right, everybody, how are we doing? I am, this is a fully open forum, so I do have, obviously some slides I would have presented on the other end of this, our recap in the large group. I'll try to integrate, what's key from this discussion related to what I would have presented as well, but this should be, audience driven. You all here, so you have some specific questions, presumably. So I will just start off opening it up for any questions, and apologies ahead of time that continuing to have back problems, so I will need to move around, standing, sitting, etc. As the discussion goes on. But thanks for stopping by. Otherwise, I'm open for questions. I would love to see your faces, but no pressure if everybody chooses to keep it off. Howdy, howdy. Thank you.
Jack. Actually, I had a question to kind of get us started here.
Sure.
Under Enriched Property Services, there's a slight clause in the QAP which says a non-course provider could be qualified if DCA approved. It's like the CORS, I don't have the language in front of me, CORS certified or DCA approved methodology. Can you give any insight if that's a viable path? What steps would need to be taken for such a service provider? And is that something that happens at pre-application or anything along those lines? That'd be great.
Sure. The baseline thing is for the third-party option. We intentionally wanted to separate out whereas its predecessor sections, Enriched Property Services, had a specific partnership lined up that needed to be included in the application. That is not needed for this. CORS is a relatively new program. It continues to expand who all is qualified. And so this is more of a commitment to be cooperative around this this partnership. So the answer to your question is therefore, there's multiple ways that or elements to this. So one, if the entity you have in mind might be CORS certified in the future, but is not now, then that would certainly be available to you. For purposes of the upcoming application, you check the box that you have that you are signing up to be cooperative and expect that our compliance team will be checking for this in the future. But you will be able to partner with whoever you want if they're CORS certified. The sentence that you're referring to, indicating other DCA approved program, that's just the out for, we right now, based on our assessment, we are not aware of another program that is as robust as CORS. That may not be the case in the future. So in the future, there's another program that our successors believe is equally as robust, then we would be able to publicize that as such in the future, and they could be certified under that program. But for this year's application purposes, you don't even need to have that that your partner is listed in the application. This is an agreement to understand that you will be monitored for this in the future, but it's not. You don't need to have a contract or a service agreement set up right now.
Okay. No, I think that answers where I was going with it. So it was future planning language of the policy. There is what it sounds like.
Yes. The big motivation here is our primary concern with the way it used to be written was around, if we were signing you up for a specific set of services for some specific amount, we don't know if you'll be able to financially afford that amount of services in the future. We don't know if that nonprofit will even still exist in the future, but we do think that there's value in resident services. And so it's more about these organizations that are certified as having the capacity to do what we're calling robust service provision, and that F1 is around in the area, then you are agreeing to be cooperative in working with them. And that is the nature of the commitment. So we intentionally wanted to separate out any promises that could not be guaranteed at this stage, while nevertheless wanting to incentivize participation in this where it's possible.
Okay, thank you.
So Jack, this is Mitchell Davenport. So this is treated similar to our agreement for 811. We say if it's there, we do it. We check, we get our 2 points, but otherwise, okay, that's fair. Thank you.
And for everybody's questions, it wasn't the original plan, but I at least think that it landed in a reasonable place. That the points are equal, where between you're the owner that there's still an incentive for the development company or the owner to reach this because it has tiebreaker potential, as I'm sure you're all aware. But we don't want to, especially recognizing at this stage, we don't. It's not realistic for every single one of the direct applicants to reach this level of robust services. So creating variation at the baseline points level, we thought maybe that's not the best thing to do, but we have that tiebreaker incentive, but otherwise we're just trying to incentivize this as widely as possible because we think it's valuable.
Well, and Jack, just as an aside, I mean, I've talked to a number of developers and managers that have applied, and Coors was happy to take their $5,000 and say thanks, but no thanks. You don't make it, and so that's, I think the way I've approached it is probably the most fair way we can do it at this point. If we're going to keep Coors involved. Thank you.
Great.
Hey Jack, I have a different question. If that's all right.
Sure.
So hopping down to the integrated supportive housing section, wanted to get your thoughts on item D, DCA section 811 commitments prior performance. So just would like to understand, is there going to be any clarity provided or like any sort of threshold given for the property requirements? So obviously, your applicant has to have a controlling interest and have to have a PBRA contract under a prior QAP. I think both of those are great. Property requirements, property contacts have responded to DCA staff seeking to initiate a PBRA contract within the timeframes communicated. And then also DCA assisted prospective residents do not face barriers in applying for a unit above those experienced by non-DCA assisted prospective residents. So I guess my question is twofold, and I could talk as long as you'd let me about it. But one, is there going to be any sort of guidance given like that, that you're before the QA, before your application is published, like, you're in good standing or anything like that, like kind of like a qualification determination kind of type item? Or like, could there ever be any cures given? Like because the reality is, like, for us, we have legitimately 75 to, we've been a long partner with y'all and have several PBRA contracts with you all and like to think of ourselves as a great partner. The reality is that something at some point may slip through the cracks. Some manager may have resigned and something not getting communicated. We always want to be a good, consistent partner, but seeing something in a scoring section always gives heartburn, and you just want to make sure that you're all squared away and good to go. And there's always, if there's a resident who claims that there were barriers, there's always more to the story as well. There may have not been something that was provided within the application to apply, all of these things. So I guess my question is,
so the answer to the question is yes. There will be, and sorry to cut you off, but I think you'll be okay with the answer. And of course, feel free to ask a follow-up if I don't clarify it. And for transparency's sake, for everyone, what Josh is referring to, which you would only know if you applied under the oh goodness, what did he call it? Underserved populations last year. That was the top 5 applicants. One of the things that we're scoring on comparative review is based on your upholding your prior 811 commitments to DCA. In that instance, we did have some variation in how we did communicate with our 811 team, identified some owners were associated with where the management company was not, there were some serious concerns we had, and that did impact review. And in that instance, in transparency, we did not previously publicize or reach out to the owners associated with those properties to let them know that there was an issue identified and give an opportunity to fix. And we do want to do that now. So we have established that, and this would have been one of my slides that I would talk about at the outset, that the idea is during the pre-application phase, we've already reached out to our 811 colleagues in the Housing Assistance Division. They will be letting us know in the next couple of weeks or so if there's any that have along the, the dimensions that are outlined in the QAP, you responding, you contracting and timely with respect to that. Any concerns with residents who say, it's taking so long that their eligibility, they've waited so long in the management company that their status to be able to capitalize on the unit has expired. Long story short, we will be, in light of that, we will be reaching out to the applicants, letting them know this is the issue and here's what it would take to cure this. And I think more broadly from a motivation standpoint, it's really not, this is not ideally, the primary goal is not to create variation among applications with this. The primary goal is to incentivize cooperation with prior scoring commitments related to 811. And so that's, we want people to correct things. We want people to know about this. And we fully understand that it's really, as Josh was mentioning, there's something could slip through the cracks. There's so many different properties in the portfolio of, these development companies. But further, it's the management companies that are going to be primarily, associated with this. So what we see, the ideal here is that through this communication during the pre-app stage, we can improve the line of communication for those who are facing the incentives to then let the management companies know about any shortfalls. And the idea is to bolster cooperative participation in the 811 program. So that the answer is yes, during the pre-app phase, we'll be letting you know if there's an issue. If you don't hear any issue, then this is you have nothing to be concerned about.
Sure.
Hey, Jack.
So would we need to check any box knowing that we would like to apply for this section and therefore would ask you to review? Or are you going to be just reviewing for everybody that applies for pre-app? And then secondly, will you let us know, hey, you're out of compliance, here are the items? Or will you also say, here's what you can do to cure them as well? Or I guess my question is, do we need to come up with our own ways to try to cure whatever there might be? Or will you tell us, this is what you need to do in order to satisfy and make sure we're all on the same page and get to go?
Certainly, ideally, it would be the latter. Only because I am not an 811 implementation expert can I say for sure whether there's a caveat I need to add there. But the goal would certainly be, because we want to get compliance through this, that we specify what steps need to be taken.
Hey, Jack.
Yes.
This is Craig Taylor. So I am really confused about a couple of things. One is, if we are a developer, have developments, and this commitment was made in the past, but DCA has never contacted us, then it seems like we're handicapped. We're not even eligible for these 2 points, even though we checked the 811 box and have developments out there that made that commitment. So it seems to be a closed club to those whom DCA never contacted, and that certainly doesn't seem fair. And then for newer developers who have checked the box, but their projects maybe are not placed in services yet, it doesn't seem like, again, it's a timing thing, but they're not even eligible for these points. Am I correct in that? And I guess my sort of pointed question is, how is that a level playing field?
It would not be a level playing field. And the reason you have that interpretation is because of an ambiguity in the way that I wrote it. I'll take responsibility for it. That doesn't make it self-evident what that's getting at. But this is we have a similar, the intent always along was to have a consistent implementation in the baseline way we're thinking about scoring on compliance, which was innocent until proven guilty. In the compliance scoring section, you start with 10 points and then we're assessing whether there's anything to be concerned about. Same thing here. We've used the phrase checking the box. The current thinking in the way that it's structured is instead the application will just, to make sure there's no confusion around how this is supposed to be treated, the assumption it is auto-populate at the 2-point level. And only for those handful of companies that have received communication will we expect be directed to provide the supporting documentation or evidence indicating that corrective measures have been taken. So this is about, it's assumed starting at the 2-point level. If there's an issue, you will have received the communications from us and understand how to move forward.
So, sorry.
Thank you. Much clearer.
I've got a question as it relates to the underwriting of this. If we're agreeing to under Section A, would we assume that we're getting those units and underwrite to FMR, or would we keep it at an affordable level in the underwriting, and how would you guys look at that?
So yes, I was going to tie into something Craig said, but lost that train of thought, so I'll just speak directly to it. This is I remember that there's, in most cases, most people who sign up for the commitment don't hear from us just due to the limited availability of our funding and needing to, make it work. So we are, the assumption, we're not underwriting for 811 rents. The thing to consider for this is that, of course, it's been a very historically contentious scoring commitment people made in the past. And the strategy with which we have implemented on the back end has adapted and changed as we learn, as we've been engaged in discussions with partners about it. And so we, the baseline assumption, the goal here is to get as many people to sign up as possible so that in the future, when compliance is affirming that people are upholding their commitments in light of any constraints that may exist, that they're following through. But we wouldn't underwrite for 811 because in most cases, these awards are not large enough to have everyone be expected to be actually getting 811 units, designated and that we would be underwriting at that level. So it would be, if there is a feasibility concern in the future, that would be part of the discussions in the long run related to compliance checking for this. And if you aren't providing it and we were expecting you to, or really in this case it would be more if we've reached out to contract and you're saying it's or to assign units and you're saying we can't, then at that point there would be a conversation around the boundaries of that and mutually agreeing on the feasibility concern at that time. We will not underwrite to 811 rents for purposes of the application.
Understood. Thank you.
Hi, this is Allie Watson. I have a question in regards to the set-asides. We are looking at applying in the preservation side set-aside with the project-based rental assistance, but the project's also a nonprofit is who's applying. So on the two things, one, can you apply for two different set-asides at the same time, or do you have to select a specific one? And then also, if we have to choose between the two and we choose to go with the PBRA, there's part of the scoring under the exceptional nonprofit that it says that it only applies to when you're applying for the nonprofit set aside. So is there the potential to get those points if we choose to go with PBRA?
Let me answer the first question, and then I will probably need to ask a clarifying question about the second part. So I have the QAP up. Let me make sure I'm speaking correctly. But the question is, can you apply for multiple set-asides?
Yes.
I don't have the numbers memorized yet for 22 of where threshold starts. Scoring is 84. Okay, we have eligibility under the preservation set-asides. So just want to make sure I'm reading it. Yeah, it says under threshold eligibility for credit under the preservation set-asides, requirements for all preservation set-aside. Applications may not compete in multiple preservation set-asides. Now, I'm going to mark this down for Q&A because I believe, and I just want to make sure we're applying consistently. I understand the motivations of the teams that wanted that in there. But I believe there were applications that competed under multiple tracks previously, but they submitted separate applications. So there wasn't any need for reviewers from different teams, confirming that, there's a scoring package for an application that relates to this set aside, but then it also is eligible under new supply and it's going to have different scoring. And that was the primary concern of any confusion around that. So what I want to confirm for Q&A purposes is that an individual application cannot check I'm going under both of these set-asides. It may be I think a committee of us will need to confirm whether that applies to if you choose to submit two fully distinct applications because it happens to be eligible under multiple, could you do that? And I can't provide it, and that's one where I will have to confirm interpretation with multiple other people.
Okay, and to confirm, it wouldn't be two different preservation set-asides. It would be the nonprofit set-aside and then the HUD Riddle assistance under the preservation set-aside.
Well, the nonprofit set-aside, that's really just an eligibility check. And we have never had any, as far as I understand, it's never had concerns meeting it. So we just go down, in core plan, it dictates, at the bottom of, we'll start with scoring this preservation set aside, this preservation set aside, then we get to new supply, rural, other metro, Atlanta, et cetera. And then at the bottom, if the nonprofit set aside hasn't been met by that point, then we will, find a way to meet it. That's not been a concern. So the nonprofit set aside is an eligibility question, and it plays a role in confirming whether you're eligible to seek points under the section exceptional nonprofit. But that doesn't end up being treated as a separate, scoring track or anything. It doesn't usually, I haven't heard of it having a functional impact on very much, except for eligibility for exceptional nonprofit.
Okay.
Did I just confuse it more, or does that answer the question?
No, you didn't confuse more, but I guess now going back to the second question that I kind of presented, then when we're applying for the preservation set aside under the HUD Riddle assistance, then can we get that exceptional nonprofit points?
So that is going to be based on 84 applicability of scoring criteria. And if anybody has, we're working with outside group to think about ways to clean up purely aesthetics, not content, but cleaning up and make it easier to digest. Fully aware that since we, a couple of years ago, or the last year, introduced, there's now set asides related to rehab and also 4%, that makes it harder to digest where all these things are going on. But what we have currently that clarifies this is the applicability of scoring criteria section, I believe, is where the answer to your question would be. So you asked if exceptional nonprofit, and let me share my screen. I should have done this in the last session more, just showing what I'm talking about. So you asked which preservation set aside you would see you're applying under the preservation set aside, say it's 9% RAD, and you want to know if exceptional nonprofit applies. You would go down and see for which sections does that's enriched property service exceptional nonprofit apply. So you would be eligible if it seems that yes, all of the preservation set asides in the 9% round would be able to provide submit an application for the exceptional nonprofit public housing authority.
Okay. Okay, great.
Hey, Jack, this is Steve Brooks. On the preservation scoring, internet access is a 2-point option on that chart where you show the eligibility of points. But when you read that section, it's only for Metro Atlanta. So how does that compare when you're scoring a rehab in another location versus an Atlanta deal? Do they just get a 2-point advantage, or is that?
Right. So, and this is where I'm very thankful that we sent out hey, if you have a question ahead of time, let us know so they can prepare to speak to that, because this would have been I need to confirm the exact language concern. But let me pull up the QAP. The short answer to your question is no, the language that creates that interpretation is not about creating a systematic disadvantage. So I will, here we go. So the pools language, geographic pools and core plan. We have 9% credit applications. And then we say, available to fund new supply. So we specify it's how it applies to 9% pool. And then we have this language that creates this expectation. All applications for certain requirements, including scoring, it may vary by pool. Now, what that was clarifying was in instances where, say, undesirables, whether you're going to be eligible for those points will vary based on how close you are to an amenity. In rural areas, we're more lax and you can be farther away and still be able to get the points for that. That's the kind of, it will point out a rule or requirement that varies by pool. This is, and we'll definitely be posting a Q&A about this because it's not clear. This is not referring to if it, basically that an entire section would be creating it, restricted to one pool, and therefore it's a systematic disadvantage. So that Atlanta Metro applicability means that for purposes of the 9% round, this is what we're talking about. But obviously, when we come to to the bond availability question, the bond process as it's available, and we're able to release, there would be, here's the set of procedures, and here's any more specific Q&A, et cetera, related to the scoring. But there would certainly, and we can put this in Q&A. There's no expectation that this creates a systematic disadvantage for one. Applications would be competing against each other, but only some of them are able to select a point option. That was not the intent there. This language that refers to that, could be construed to be speaking to that Atlanta Metro pool only, was really referring to things like if you're in a rural area under 4% scoring, you need a certain distance to amenities. In a metro area, it would be a different distance. That's what that was speaking to.
So if you go to the chart on page, I think it's 86 of the PDF. So like 2 pages, yeah. So down there where it says internet access and there's 2 points all the way across, where you have 9% HTC, if you're proposing a 9% rehab, then when you go down to the internet access detailed section, it says only if you're in Atlanta. So you're saying that nobody in preservation will be able to claim those 2 points?
I was thinking I was originally seeing this in the context of the 4% issue, but what I could speak to is what the intent was there, and if there's certainly no intent for this to make it such that no two applications should be competing against each other, and they don't even have the same opportunity to opt for a particular section. The whole reason for this 6-column table was to allow for more apples to apples comparison in the competitive review process. So that's all I can speak to is the intent. Your updated question, I wasn't yesterday conceiving the question in that light, so I won't speak as directly to it right now. But it's a great question and will need to be addressed in Q&A for clarifying that guidance.
Thank you.
And we'll communicate all this stuff later. But as I am writing things down, but also we'll let everybody know what our backlog of questions are once we open it up, which is this week. And if you don't see a question that you want answered in that list, please submit it to make sure that we do address it.
This is Jeff Thompson here. I have a question regarding the risk of affordable housing loss in the AC Rehab Preservation section. Do you have any guidance as to how we might be able to pre-score?
Yes.
What are the elements of that, and is there a rubric or some sort of algorithm that we can use?
Yes, and I was hoping to have that published to as a resource for you to view today. I did not, but I did have slides on this. So how about I walk through those slides real quick, and then we can see if you have any questions.
Okay.
All right. You'll see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Affordability loss risk. So the general point here is that what we're intending with this section, and similar to the way that this new type of comparative review that was also baked into underserved populations this past 2021 QAP, was the opportunity to, when we're wanting to score based on on a comparative basis, that we're basically able to, rather than setting specific thresholds, you say you must be 17 feet away from a bus stop to get points for this. It's instead that there are certain priorities that, or certain things that really matter to DCA, but it's difficult to translate that into a specific provision. So instead, can we allow for something that's the equivalent of you're coming in and your document is just a narrative that and supporting evidence for your narrative that makes your pitch. You are already experienced in making these pitches, and whether it's related to your on an ad hoc basis for informal meetings with DCA over the years, or as you're going to local government communities, you're having a sense for what matters to the your audience, and just making the case and providing the evidence supporting the case of why you should get the points for or why you're the best for this. And then so I will go through a few considerations here that state specifically what we're looking for and what matters. But that's the gist here, that we are really, as opposed to saying you must, if I don't know how much to include, but I say this is very different from, say, the exceptional nonprofit rubric that will have, say, if you meet, or the community transformation one, where it's set aside, if you have 4 partnerships, you get this many points. If you have 3 partnerships, you get this many points, and then that leads to a review. This is more of within any individual criterion or value that we're stating matters, we want to assess these. And the reason for doing it this way, as opposed to just having everybody come in, and if you are applying for this, you can give your verbal presentation on an open-ended basis. We know that some agencies do that. I believe, as I understand it, Colorado has more open-ended presentations as a big part of how they review things. The idea here is to try to balance something that places boundaries around our judgment. So it's not just we are handpicking what we think is the best one, but recognizing that what is best will depend on which particular angle we're looking at. And so, forcing us to, forcing us to be consistent, and then it'll be easier to check our work, or you can make your argument if you disagree. And then further, that way we want to make it very clear that you understand what we're looking for. So that's just the why. Now here's the few considerations that we anticipate mattering, and these would be laid out in the affordability risk loss form, which would be structured very similarly to the underserved doc previously, where it's really just here's the consideration, make your case, and tell us what refer us to the documents you submitted if those are there. Some of it will be already in the application, some of it will be new info. So I'll make that point later. This is good. I'm getting to test things out before the large group. I'll need to be more concise. So one, of course, the first criterion, we've defined what the negative outcome is that we're concerned about, and that is what's the possibility of if DCA doesn't intervene and grant an award, tell us about the likelihood of the risk defined in this section being realized over the next few years. So if it's about displacement or increase in rents, if DCA doesn't act, then what is the what information can you draw on to tell us why this matters? This is intended to mimic when we have countless conversations with developers who will come in, or to be able to say, like, this is a huge, here's a property that's very much at risk for these reasons. This should be a priority for DCA, rather than that being something that entirely happens. Those discussions, there's no avenue within the QAP for that conversation. That's what this is intended to get at. So the guiding question that will be in the form will be speaking of, if this application is not funded in 2022, what evidence sheds light on the likelihood that these negative outcomes defined in the QAP would be realized over the next couple of years? If there's variation in the extent to which we see, well, for some types of property, for some properties, it's say it's a very hot market. If this is a tax credit property you're looking to acquire, the risks there. The most even more obvious one, this section originally was born out for the naturally occurring affordable housing set aside scoring, but this will vary by pool, the extent to which this is a risk, but you just convey that narrative and supporting evidence. What can you tell us about the market? What about the current owner and the stipulations, etc.? What if you were to come in and tell us this should be a high priority for us because of the risk to residents? What would you tell us, and what evidence would you provide? That's the extent of it. Any questions on this part first, and then I'll get on to the additional two other considerations. All right. Could someone confirm that you can still hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Great, thanks. The other point I was going to make, which I think is easier to say now after you've shown this, seen this consideration, is the previous slide talked about, we fully expect that for certain of the considerations of a review, this one especially, it's not going to be the same kind of discussion or set of risks depending on the type of set aside you're applying under. And we fully understand that, and that was the primary reason for having separate set asides, as opposed to, say, having USDA compete against against a RAD application, compete against a tax credit property. Specifically, the public input we got last year in developing the 2021 QAP was around saying, you know, we were opening up to preservation generally, and we had structured the language with a clear targeting of tax credit properties. And we got the input of this is going to systematically disadvantage USDA properties because the risk you're talking about, it looks very different. The risk factors associated with that would result in that look very different. So this is intended to be open-ended, and then the way to help with it is to ease, you know, that argument is to set them up that only comparable preservation priorities are competing with one another when they're making their case. And so that we fully understand that, say, this risk assessment would be very, very different for a HUD-assisted property relative to, say, on the tax credit side, depending on who the owner is and what how hot the real estate market looks, what is the risk of that converting to market or any impacts on residents. That's very different set of risk factors and likelihood. And it may very well be the case that for a set aside, it doesn't generate variation related to that. But the main intent was to say, we're not going to decide ahead of time what all these risk factors are and try to lay it out. We just have we've established what are the preservation priorities in the QAP, about the RAD, HUD assisted, and then the ones that will be paired with home at a later point in USDA. And let's let them compete against each other with respect to this preservation priority. So that's the bulk of the, you know, the burden on the applicant of providing information, let's say. Next are, you know, the second consideration is we've also, and this was the case in underserved this past summer, for certain cases, we realized that it would be duplicative and, I mean, not optimal, not even the best information to make anyone reinvent the wheel with respect to a different submission or a different narrative when elsewhere in the application talks about this. So the market study that is already supplied will also be able to shed light on, you know, the rent differentials between assisted, you know, whatever is the restricted unit and what's available elsewhere in the market that could shed light on that risk. The idea being here, you know, if we're a property that's in an area where the tax credit limits, if it's for the tax credit set aside, the tax credit limits and the and market rate properties is not that different, that's going to shed light on the risk being of less, because the priority here is both a matter of what's the likelihood of it coming out of the program, and then also if it does come out of the program, what's likely to happen in light of the market. So the idea here will be, you know, the form will say this, is that we will reference the market study. You can use your narrative to highlight salient points from the market study, but we're not expecting you to do any separate analysis from that. And the thing that I was going to should say also, because, you know, we genuinely find it helpful, the public input we receive on some of these documents. So some of you may have noticed, and the email blast that comes out in the next couple of days will confirm this, that we're putting out these. There will, in the next couple of days, there will be a version of this document, lays out these key considerations, the information we expect to lean on, and therefore the narrative and evidence you'd be expected to provide. If you have recommendations for how we could be thinking about this, you know, better, let us know. We may make tweaks. There will be a, you know, about 10-day public comment period before we will finalize this. Of course, we take all of that with a grain of salt because we understand some suggestions may be, you know, especially well suited to particular specific developments, and we wouldn't go that way. But you may provide info that would indicate, you know, what kind of information we would limit or not, and related to our general priorities here. So everything I'm talking about here, this is what we're getting at, but it may be tweaked based on public comment we receive. Any questions about this second consideration? Cool. Second one is similar in that where I said the primary burden for narrative and new evidence would relate to that. What's the likelihood of these negative outcomes being realized? And the other two are more about what our sense is the best information is already in the application in the market study. So the second criterion listed in the QAP is local supply and demand gap for comparable affordable housing options. So this is speaking to, of course, the idea being if it's going to exit the program and changes occurs that rents significantly increase, that's the extent to which that is a problem is also going to be related to what alternatives there are in the community or not. So this is discussed in great detail in the market studies we've received in terms of what are the most comparable properties, and say, what are the wait lists looking like? What's the occupancy looking like? And those factors, we would just reference that in making this determination. So we might expect this kind of thing, this kind of community level take on what's the landscape of comparably affordable options in the community. This would probably we expect to play a comparatively greater weight for, say, the HUD assisted housing properties, where this would be what this would be, stating or highlighting is the variation between communities that have more or less opportunities in the way of these federally assisted properties. I think that is my spiel. Any questions on that one before I can?
No, thanks, Jack.
Oh.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Let me see if there was no, I said that stuff. Okay. So great, we have our tutorial now recorded, and that'll be posted to the website. It's 12:12. We have another 18 minutes. Are there any other questions?
Hi, Jack. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was wondering if we could circle back around to the core certification to make sure I understand correctly. So for category B, is it in order to get the 2 points, do we have to seek a third-party certified cores contractor and sort of do maybe a letter of intent for the application, or is it just merely committing to accept cores down the road if we're successful?
It is merely committing to accept.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up.
And I will, now that I'm seeing, I have some slides on this, and of course there'll be some amount of, we'll see how much time there is, but the gist is, the one part that I'll bring up from the slides related to this is we don't want there to be, seeing how, cores is growing. More providers are finding ways to increase the robustness of their services level, or there were a few who seem to be at that level already, just receiving those certifications, and that being the evidence for us. That's growing, and we don't want to systematically disadvantage any communities based on whether there's a course provider there now or not. So for geographic purposes, nobody should question, no matter where you are in the state, you should feel comfortable checking that box. The limitations you want to have in mind is basically, do you realistically envision taking on, are you committed to the services that are being described here? And primarily from a financial standpoint, do you think that is realistic? And don't check the box if you're not comfortable with the idea of, in the future, DCA compliance team finding that you coming in and being able to afford. Obviously, the compliance monitoring will be within light of constraints that are around at the time. So we're not making the notion is not that anybody would be forced to not have any money to fix the HVAC system. Oh, sorry, I just got a pop-up from someone about forms and manuals updates. It appears some of those are getting updated right now. But yes, the idea is everyone is eligible for this. It's not structured in a way we're expecting point deductions if you checked the box. The question is, are you committed to doing this if it's possible? That we're just trying to incentivize. We know not every property in the future will be able to afford everything that is being agreed to, but we want to make sure that the cash flow that could be reinvested in the residents is. And that's really what's at the heart of this. But having said that, many of you will recall, the way that, as I understand it, and this is not a knock on any predecessors, it's not a problem with anything, but obviously as there's turnover at the agency, there are shifts in perspectives on what might compliance monitoring look like. So as I understand it, our team was potentially more aggressive in 811 implementation than might have been communicated in the past. I don't know that for sure. And it would be understandable, if so. It's not a knock on anybody. You can't know how your provisions will be interpreted in the future. So that's to say, if you are you should rely on what the language says and what Q&As we post in determining your comfort level and saying that you're committed to this. Because we cannot say for sure how, whether any scoring related to this in the future may, be an issue. Clearly now we're scoring on 811 implementation. And that's just to bolster cooperation with those prior commitments. And not sure that may have been anticipated in the past when people were committing to 811, but that's how we're thinking of it now. And you should think of future compliance monitoring impacts and whether the language supports what you're comfortable with when indicating that you can that you're signing up for this.
Hey,
Okay.
Jack, this is Sarah Buckner. About the cores, just touching on that. So there's no MOU required or anything like that like there was in the past. It's just checking a box and, knowing that you're going to have to do it, obviously, but it's just like a yes or a no.
Correct.
Okay, great.
And I think COVID, as far as motivation goes, one of the biggest things, we wanted to pivot to something that say you don't anticipate COVID. If we force everybody to sign up for specific services related to a gym class that now can't happen, when really the new resident need that we didn't anticipate was around COVID access to tests and vaccinations or something coming to the site and facilitating that. That's the new emphasis. We don't want people committing to specific partners that may or may not exist in the future. We don't want people committing to specific sets of services that may or may not be the most relevant or highest need in the future. CORES is about ongoing assessment of resident needs and tailoring services over time to those evolving needs.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hey, this is Jordan Wilson with Vantage. I had a couple questions regarding the pre-application process, so I wasn't sure which meeting to ask those in, so I'm just going to throw them out.
Sure. How many questions do you have? If it's depending on the question, I would direct you to say construction versus.
No, I think it's just pretty broad. So with the pre-qualification before, we had to determine if we were going for, what type of pool we were competing in and whether it was new construction or rehab. So is that still the case? And if so, do you submit separate qualification determination, like separate pre-applications, I guess, if you were considering both a new construction deal and a separate rehab deal, or do you just mark both boxes?
So I believe the answer to your question, and this is one that we just lost the attorney who oversaw the qualifications process. But as I understand it, we are qualifying teams at the pre-app stage, and that is sufficient for any applications that team submits at full application. So, but the underwriters will be able to or underwriters or director's office, whoever's got a long line right now, will be able to confirm that for you. And certainly that's one that we can easily clarify in Q&A. We will, as we did last year, prioritize pre-app related Q&A.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And since the pre-app is not up yet, I know you guys are working on it and it'll be due in the next 2 weeks or so. Is there any changes to, per se, the third-party type documents that we need to be obtaining? So, several years ago, we had to get letters from other state agencies and things like that. Is there anything that you foresee that would be a long lead time? I'm just concerned that when it gets posted, something has changed or something is new that was not previously required, that we're going to have to request from investors or other state agencies.
Mm-hmm. I hear the concern, and I will not be able to. I'm not just being diplomatic. I am unable to respond meaningfully to that question.
Okay,
but,
I understand.
Yeah, definitely. Submit that. Especially as I understand it, things should be new things should be uploaded rather quickly. Mitch mentioned several things that were today, tomorrow. So take a look as you see anything new or specific. So submit the question in Q&A. We'll prioritize it because it's pre-app related.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Because we got 9 minutes.
Hey, Jack. This is Josh. Are we able to apply for home loans at pre-app, or is that all going to be handled in separate NOFAs?
So the full answer to that question is that we, the QAP, part of the question is, the QAP language that describes the consent process has not been utilized really since we took it out of the round for points purposes. We recognize that is different. Are you asking because you are thinking of including that, and you're thinking of utilizing home for 9%? Here's where I'm struggling. Obviously, we've gone through some turnover. The person who primarily was involved with that is no longer here. But I believe, and we'll just need to clarify that you can indeed request it as described in the QAP. People can request a home consent letter, and the whole selection process will be based on if requests exceed the amount that we have available. But slightly that conversation I will need to confirm with a couple of other people. So, but to confirm, your question is, so I can prioritize it. Your question just is, indeed, can we apply for a home consent letter in the pre-app process in order to be able to list home as a funding source on my full application for the 9% round? That's the question.
That's correct.
Okay, yeah. And yes, I will just ensure that, the current leadership just need to touch base with the people who picked up the baton from their predecessor, that they're interpreting that the same way as was previously interpreted. And we'll clarify that. But for that question more broadly, we just, publicized that we are interested in making more home available for several eligible possibilities. One of them being applications that are in need, that feel like they need more gap financing, even with the 9% tax credit. So in addition to us answering that question, respond to our survey indicating that indeed this would be a useful way to allocate some of our home funds, just to open it up for sure to 9% applicants.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jack, I apologize that this question was asked. I left to go in another session and then came back.
All good.
On the housing tax credit rehab set aside or pool, whatever we call it, if a project, a previous project, or a project you're submitting has done a qualified contract, does it qualify in that section?
So it would be out of the program now because it's gone through QC, you're saying?
Or it's in its, whatever y'all call it, the decontrol period?
That as far as in the decontrol here,
basically, if you could answer for both those situations.
Right, the question is for both of them. Yeah, is it eligible? So QC eligibility, That is what I will have to talk to our, in how to treat that if it's ambiguous, to our portfolio management team. So I will, the question is, are you eligible if you're in the decontrol stage and also if you're after QC? My guess, no, why state a guess? I shouldn't guess. But I have some guesses, but I will need to talk to our portfolio management team. Four minutes. Please. Oh, I see. Did I just say hand raise? And then promptly
Yes.
go for it. Go for it.
These are probably very simple questions, but why do you say 9%? Is it you're only giving 9% tax credit towards a project?
What do that? You're saying 9% versus 4%?
Yeah, like what's the difference?
So 9%. These are two different competitive applications. They're basically two different funding sources. So the 9% program will be a larger functionally subsidy amount. And on the other hand, on the 4% program, those tend to fund much larger developments that will have to support more debt. And that's the primary difference is how much debt are you expected to carry? How large is the subsidy? And then associated with that, how large of the developments typically. The 9% developments are much smaller, the 4% developments much larger on average.
What would you say would be an average 9% development? What would that look like with cost?
With cost?
Mm-hmm. Like 5 million, 6 million?
It has been several years since I was an underwriter. So does anybody else have a useful response for that one? I could throw a number out, but I don't think that I would. I mean, I could throw per with someone starting to provide a better, helpful answer. I'm not sure that I can say something useful.
Well, that's fine. I was just trying to get an idea, and I also was looking at possibly developing senior housing, and wanting to know, is it better to look at smaller towns versus metro Atlanta areas for senior housing?
So I think that the primary thing, and I should have made this the first question, is to ask from what perspective you're coming with the question. So it sounds like if you're a developer who's interested, then I would say the first thing you'll need to know is we do have pretty high qualification standards that we need to review. And so if just based on the question, I guess if you haven't done housing tax credit developments before, then at least under this current QAP, you're not going to be eligible to seek funding. However, there may be partnership opportunities, et cetera, which are discussed in the QAP. But I would, here's what I should say. The housing clearly you've made it to the housing tax credit webpage. You're here today. On that housing tax credit page are contacts. So you should feel free to reach out to us and pose your questions so that we can direct you to, depending on your circumstances, the right set of information to get you oriented in the program. But under this year's cycle, based on the question, you on your own, you would not be eligible to develop.
And that is because of the short span, or because you're not accepting elderly housing this cycle?
We do accept, it's because we require that in order to develop a housing tax credit property on your own, you have to have done it before. And the way that is done is by partnering with experienced developers, just because it's such a complicated program. So,
oh, yes. Okay. I do have some people I could partner with. Okay.
Okay. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, well, I don't know if they like me saying this, but the Georgia Affordable Housing Coalition may be a group to reach out to for if you're getting, so I'm not sure if they do any orientation kind of resources, but other developers are better to talk to than me. I'm a bureaucrat.
Okay.
So it is 12:30. I have to hang on another second or two if anyone has another question, but I will otherwise take some time to eat almonds and close my eyes. Yes.
This is Roya Collins. I just have a quick question. Are you guys seeing a lot of pushback from on the income averaging stuff from investors?
I'm the wrong person to ask about that, but what I can say is in the conferences we've attended for all housing agencies around the country, the current expectation or understanding is that the IRS has made it unworkable, and we are just advocating for them to make it workable. So certainly we have heard many concerns related to it, and we, in terms of how we are handling any concerns of those who have already committed to income averaging, I'm not the right person to talk to about that, but investors, anybody, the answer to this question, we're hearing, tons of resistance, but we agree with you. We are advocating, we are lobbying the IRS to issue updated guidance that overturns what they stated previously.
Would DCA approve like a change in your unit mix if it wasn't a points deal? Like if you didn't get points for the income averaging, would DCA, is DCA likely to approve a change in your unit mix?
That is, I'm the wrong person to speak to about how that would be reaching out basically about a project concept change.
Right.
And so someone would need to, I don't know, it may be the case that they will accept those requests and consider it. It may be the case that they've already issued guidance that says we won't even take PCCs about unit mix changes like that. I'm not sure. So
who should we go to on that?
Let me share my screen real quick so that everyone's clear about the website, the portion of the website that lists these on the housing tax credit page. I was going to mention this in the full group. All right, y'all see my screen. We are on the housing tax credit page. Go down, housing tax credit program communication, and sign up for our email list or housing finance staff contact information. We just lost our PCC coordinator. The new PCC coordinator needs to tell me there. Okay, so we need to update this to include, and this is, we're updating this with more specificity as we hear things. So what I will say is it appears I need to, unless anyone saw something that was self-evident, I think we need to update for PCCs, click here or email this person. So we need to do that. Thank you for the question.
One quick question, sorry, before we go. Has there been an announcement about the 4% tax credits and bond allocation in regards to if any has become available for this year?
No, there's not been a communication except for if you missed the opening, we recorded all the sessions and there was a bond program update then. So when we post it to the website, you should watch that to see what the full update is. But the answer is we haven't released saying we can take in new applications because there's bond amounts available.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, I missed the first part of the webinar.
All good, understandable. Okay, I'm going to take a little break and make sure I have my notes ready for the coming back to group discussion after this. So bring your questions to the next session, and thanks for all the questions.